Hello and welcome to a tutorial on how to create a beautiful Kereru bird using watercolor, pencils and the Pigeon Letters paintbrushes. Hi, I'm Stacey from the Pigeon Letters design team, and let's paint a beautiful Kereru bird. So let's get all our supplies in order. We have a pencil here. We have the Pigeon Letters liner brush. And next we have the Pigeon Letters round size 2 and a round size 4 and a round size 8. Next, make sure you have your paper size A6. And we're going to take our pencil and go about 3/4 of the way down, and we're going to draw our branch going across the page. And I'm not pressing down too hard on the pencil, I'm keeping it very light. So remember, 3/4 of the way down, and then we're going to go across the page to draw our branch. And our beautiful Kereru will be perched on top of the branch. From your branch, you want to go 1/4 down from the page in the middle, and this is when we're going to draw our Kereru. So that is the first big wing there, and then we're going to go on the other side and draw the other wing. And this Kereru, he's a big boy, so give him a nice belly. And then we're going to do his tail down the bottom. And I can just lightly go over that and just erase it if I need to later on. For the head, this is the tricky part. We just want to draw in close to there, just a round shape coming up here, like a semicircle. And then we're just going to keep going and go down into the beak. And you'll see that I'm just doing a loose sketch, and you can erase as you go. Now I'm just going to go over the outlines with my pencil just a little bit, slightly darker, and just tidy it up a little bit. And so that's perfectly fine to erase and then just tidy it up, so that you're happy with the shape. For the Kereru, the wood pigeon endemic to New Zealand, it has lots of beautiful colours, and the way in which I have designed the Kereru with all the different partitionings you're seeing me do now will be able to help with selecting those colours and presenting them in all their glory. So if you follow loosely what I'm doing, this will encourage shape as well for the Kereru, and the certain partitions for the wings and the plumage area. And I'm just loosely sketching, not too hard with the pencil, and then if you need to, you can erase. If you're needing to just tidy it up a little bit, that's perfectly fine. So if you just loosely copy what I'm doing, I'm partitioning the Kereru, and I won't do the claws until the very end, so don't worry about those. For the head, we want to just tidy it up if you need to, if you're not happy with the shape. And then the beak, and then I'm going to draw a line. I'll do the eye. So we want to figure out where that eye wants to be. So with the line along the beak there, I'm just going to sort of figure out that's where I want my eye to be. And from there I can partition. And again, just nice and light on the pencil, just makes it easier to erase. if your pencil is very dark, don't worry too much, because we will be going over those areas later on. There we go. So I'm just tidying up as I go to make the shape a little bit more smoother. Now I have got a palette here. You don't have to use a palette, you can use a just a dish, dinner plate, and the colors that I have chosen, they are listed in the supplies list, and you can be creative with these colors if you like. I haven't actually got a purple in this lineup, so you could have a purple if you like. And I'm just pre-wetting them first. I want them to sit and soak so that I get the best out of my watercolor paints. Alright, so we're going to start off with the branch, and I'm pre-wetting my area that I'm going to be working on here with water, and I am going to be using two colors, a burnt umber and a Payne's grey. Predominantly I will be mostly using the burnt umber, and the wet on wet will allow it to dance on the paper and move around and settle with texture, as opposed to using, say, a wet on dry technique. The wet on wet will allow the paint to go where the water is. So I am predominantly going to focus on mostly getting a washed area of the branch completely with the burnt umber, and then what you'll see that I'm doing is I'm just giving a light glaze of the burnt umber is that I will start to add some darker layers to the top and bottom of the branch, and just to some random parts of the branch to encourage texture, shape, shadow. And I am just going along the bottom there and adding that in, and just, if I need more water I'll get it, otherwise, because I have pre-soaked the paints and put them into my palette, there's a good amount of water to paint ratio there. So every now and then I'll just re-wet it from there instead of working directly from the pan. This gives me more control. And I'm just going along the bottom there and then just doing a few bits and bobs. So you don't have to completely colour it in if you don't want. You can have some spots that are sort of showing variation of light and dark. With the Payne's grey, I'm not going to load up my brush too much because it is quite dark, and then I'm just going to lightly put a couple of spots in certain areas where I feel that I'd like to add some texture or shadow. You can be creative with this, with how you would like to add that in. If you don't have a Payne's grey, you can mix that with, I believe, burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Then I'm just going in with a moistened wet brush. So I got rid of the paint that was in there, and I'm just going through and letting it bleed out and draw into the wet areas, and encouraging it to play and dance with the burnt umber that's already there. And this will help the Payne's grey that is quite dark appear a bit more subtle. And then just going back in with my burnt umber as well around the Payne's grey areas, just to encourage a bit more shadow. And then any area where I think it's sort of drying not very dark, then I'll just add a bit more there too. And we're working quickly because we're wanting to take advantage of the wet paint that's already on the paper, and this means that I won't need to go back in. So now that I am happy with that, I can let it dry, and I am going to move on to the rest of my Kereru and the different partitions with the colours that I have. Right, so for the first colour, I've actually, for the maroony red, I've gone with a French liqueur red, and that is for the head here. And I'm just starting off with quite a pigmented, loaded brush. And what you'll find is you'll be going over your pencil lines, but the pencil lines are there to help us with partitioning for the colours, but also you're going to see as I work further on that there is another reason for that line, because we're going to use that for something else later on. And I'm just going over and adding in layers to make it darker, and if it does dry, then I can go in and do another layer later on. And take your time during this process to actually go along the lines carefully, especially if some of the colours you're working with are staining pigments. So do take your time. And I'm just doing the second partition here for the wing, and that's the same red. And just going over and adding some details there, and the layers again, as I said, to make it darker as it starts to dry. Now the next colour that we have is more of a turquoisey greeny blue, so you can be creative here with using any kind of turquoise that you might have. And this one is the quite good colour for the Kereru. This one is really quite reminiscent of the Kereru, and you'll see that this colour features quite often. With this partition, keep going until you fill in the area, leaving a gap between the bottom part and the branch so that they don't, the colours don't touch. And just keep layering more colour, the same colour, onto that partition. So with the same colour, we're going to go and work in filling the other partitions. So just follow my lead with the partitions that I'm filling in, and making sure that there is a gap between the different colours. Not so much an issue if you've got the same turquoise colour next to each other. If they're going to touch, they're just going to be the same colour bleeding into each other. But the key is to make sure that you're leaving a gap between any colour that is different. So I'm making sure that the bottom, that the branch isn't touching the green turquoise, and leaving a gap that is maybe about 3 millimeters in width, so not a very large gap, just enough to go over it with our colour at the end. Our next colour is going to be a very light, sort of a lime green, and we're just going to apply that into the partitions, making sure that we're not touching the other colour. If you accidentally do touch the other colour, you can use a paper towel to slightly dab that area to dry it up, and that stops the water and soaks it up with the paint so they don't bleed into each other. And then once it's dry, you can just go over that area again. So just follow my lead with filling in those areas with the green. With the same green, we just want to get it watered down a little bit so that we can get a washed out plumage area on the Kereru. So we just want it to be a tinted area, and we're just going to fill in that partition there in the front with that washed out green, and then just to the side, being very careful here because it's such a small area to fill in. And that is why the brushes, the Pigeon Letter brushes, are great, because they have the ability to hold a really good point. And if you're worried that it's too dark, you can just get your paintbrush and pick up some of that paint. Next, we need to fill in our beak, which you could have done at the beginning with the red, but I didn't. So you can just fill that in now very gently, making sure that you're not touching the other colours if you can help it. And that's the same red, the French liqueur red, or a maroon. You could use a maroon. And while I'm there, I will also just touch up the red areas and make it a bit more vibrant again, because it's dried since that time. Next up, we are going to move into our Payne's Grey and fill in the rest of our bird. Well, the most. We're going to do the beautiful tail at the end there with our Payne's Grey, and then you can just wash out the brush and give it a more diluted look at the bottom there, and just splash some colour around, being very careful here because the Payne's Grey is a bit darker near the plumage. And of course, and just there by the beak, we're going to fill that in too. And also, just go ahead and do another layer of the turquoise green if you think it's a little bit dried out. So I'm just adding another layer there and touching up some other areas where I want it to be a bit more vibrant. Okay, this is going to be a fun part, because we're going to fill in our background for wash of a colour of your choice. Actually, I've chosen a cobalt blue, and I'm using my size 8 Pigeon Letters round brush. You could use a flat wash brush here if you like, and I'm just wetting the area with water, and then I'm going to splash my colour in. This is going to help with encouraging a variety of different variations in the tone and colour of the blue, as well as giving me a bit more flexibility with speeding up the paint process here. It would take a bit longer if I was doing wet on dry. So with the wet on wet technique, the idea is that the paint will go where the water is. So by using the water there, I am just speeding that process up a little bit and filling it in with my beautiful vibrant blue. But you can choose a different colour. You could do a purple if you wanted. That would be quite nice. And I'm just filling in all the area, and I'm leaving a gap around my Kereru. So I don't want to touch the Kereru. And then once I'm happy with that wash background, I will just go around the edges. You don't have to go all the way around. If you don't, you can leave a bigger gap. and then I'm going to wet the bottom again, the same process as the top, and take I'm actually taking paint directly from the pan here because I want it a bit more pigmented, but you don't have to do that, of course. And you'll see that there is really no particular way that I am painting the blue onto the paper. I am just letting it do its thing and moving it around and splashing in some extra colour randomly in the hope that it will just add texture. For the claws, I've already drawn them in as a guide for myself, but what I've done is I've just gone directly down in between the smaller gap there, and I'm drawing 3 little claws like so, and then the same right next to the turquoise green there in the corner, and I'm doing 3 claws there, so it's half on the ledge or the branch and half on the plumage. And then just a little bit of a straight line at the top there. Next up, we are going to fill in the eye with the Payne's Grey, and you're just literally filling it in with the Payne's Grey. 1 layer or a couple of layers is fine for that. Nice and careful. And while you're there, you may as well do another layer of the Payne's Grey in the partitions of the Kereru. So I'm just adding in that layer there very carefully, not touching the sides. And then for the bottom partition, I am just going to make sure it's a little bit more washed out, so not as pigmented. And I'm just washing out the brush and just letting it sort of be very watered down looking. Okay, here comes the fun part. We've done our pigeon, done our background. Now we're ready to move on to adding in another colour over the lines that we left blank with a shimmer paint. Now the shimmer paint I have used here is just a light gold, so you can choose if you want silver or a gold or another shade. I'm using the Pigeon Letters liner and size 2 brush because they are very fine. Make sure that you pre-wet your shimmer paint and let it sit for at least a couple of minutes, and then you can jump into filling in all the lines in between the partitions, and make sure that the paint is dry before doing this. So you can either use a hairdryer or a heat gun, or you can just let it sit and go and have a cup of tea or have a little break and come back to it, or maybe come back to it at the end of the week. So you want to fill in all of those lines with the size 2 round. And I'm doing this a bit, it's a bit sped up, but as you can see, I'm trying to go very carefully. You'll see that I haven't secured my paper down, and this means that I can move it around just to make it easier for getting all of these different partitions. With your liner brush, what you want to do is to wet it, make sure that there's not too much paint on it, like a blob on it, and we're going to just add some very fine details on the tail at the end. And I am just literally not putting too much pressure down when I'm applying it. And then just a few dots there as well. And then I am going to basically take the liner brush and apply the same sort of lines along all the different areas, the partitions of the Kereru. And I will vary the different applications of pressure while I hold the brush. And don't worry too much about whether the lines that you're making are perfectly straight. They can just be quite random, and the idea is that it's just adding a little bit more detail and structure to the Kereru. And because it's a shimmer as well, it actually looks quite fabulous and shimmery and sparkly. Because the liner brush is really fine, this is a great time for you to add the details to the Kereru's eye, going around the area around the eye and doing a dot in the middle. And then I'm just basically going in and filling in all the rest of the details while I'm there. And you'll just want to continue doing all of those partitions, as I am as well. And you'll see that I'm just doing it quite randomly. Little dots and lines and curves, and just filling in all of those areas with the same gold there. No particular gold that you have to use. Any brand is fine. Just make sure that you let it pre-wet and soak for a good couple of minutes, and this just means that it's particularly pigmented and not very watery. You want it to be nice and pigmented and sparkly. So I'm just filling in the rest of the areas of the Kereru, and just really random, really. This is when you can get a little bit creative and do different patterns and dots and things for the feathers. Again, this liner is so fine that it's really ideal to do the claws with these gold. So I'm just very carefully going around, and this means that it will bring a detail and highlight the actual claws. There you go. So I've just gone around that with the gold again, same gold. And then I am just adding a little random speckles into the branch, just because I feel like it, and why not? And we have finished our beautiful Kereru. It's vibrant and sparkly and fabulous. I really want to see your Kereru, so tag me and the Pigeon Letters.